This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we talk about the explosive testimony of fired FBI Director James Comey before the Senate Intelligence Committee yesterday, he said that President Trump tried to derail an investigation into National Security Advisor General Michael Flynn's links to Russia and accused Trump of lying about why he was fired. In a statement after Thursday's hearing, Donald Trump's personal attorney, Mark Kasowitz, rebutted James Comey's claims that the president asked him to drop the Flynn investigation.
The president never, in form or substance, directed or suggested that Mr. Comey stop investigating anyone, including the president never suggested that Mr. Comey, quote, let Flynn go, close quote.
For more, we continue with our roundtable with Shana Kadadal, Senior Managing Attorney at Center for Constitutional Rights in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Marcy Wheeler, independent journalist who covers national security and civil liberties issues, runs EmptyWheel.net, and in Washington, D.C., Mehdi Hassan, award-winning British journalist, broadcaster at Al Jazeera English. When you hear Kasowitz, this is the personal attorney of Donald Trump, and it's important to note that as he's sought out personal attorneys right now, as he's had to lawyer up, it's been reported that 4 major law firms have said no to him, concerned they cannot control their client. So Kasowitz is a lawyer from New York that he used for his real estate business. Shana Kadadal, talk about that and the substance of what he said.
Sure. You know, I think Trump clearly needs someone who's not just a Wall Street sort of pit bull like Kasowitz. You know, the written statement that he issued had a, typographical error in the first sentence and one in every single paragraph. He misspelled president. Unfortunately, I think the large law firms that have people who really know how to do political investigation defense think Trump won't pay them. But putting all that distractive stuff to one side, basically what Kasowitz has said is that he thinks that, Comey has leaked this information through his friend Dan Richman in Columbia to the press, and essentially implies that it's protected by executive privilege, which is ridiculous on a number of grounds, right? First of all, the president let Comey testify, which means he didn't assert executive privilege with respect to this information. The president talked about these meetings and gave his own account, really, of what happened in them, so he's waived any privilege that exists. It's not attorney-client privilege, it's not national security related. And beyond that, it's not clear that you can use executive privilege to stop somebody who you've fired from talking. Executive privilege shields existing employees who don't want to talk. When the employee wants to sing or when they're a former employee, there's nothing there. The reason I go into some detail on this is basically, look, one of the implications that comes out of all that is that if there are tapes, those tapes are not going to be protected by executive privilege either.
So this is very significant, the issue of the tapes. And Comey talked about how shocked he was when the first tweet attacking him from President Trump was, what if there are tapes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't really believe there are tapes. I mean, this is White House whose staffers seem to have trouble figuring out how to turn the lights on in conference rooms. So I think it might take a little more, sophistication to be able to set that up. But if there are,
you
they're
could have a
not going to be
tape recorder
privileged.
in your pocket.
You could, in that very large fitting suit that Trump always wears. But I really, it's not going to be protectable, is the bottom line, given how much has been said already about these conversations.
I wanted to go to Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins, who questioned James Comey about what he did with the written notes from his January 6th meeting with Donald Trump.
And finally, did you show copies of your memos to anyone outside of the Department of Justice?
Yes.
And to whom did you show copies?
I asked, President tweeted on Friday after I got fired that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. And so I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
So he asked a friend of his to do it, Marcy Wheeler. Talk about the FBI director as leaker, and admitted one.
Well, I don't think we should use the term leaker, Amy. I think we should use the term release, because there's nothing, as Shana just explained, I mean, there's nothing about the memos that are in question here, the memos describing unclassified meetings, that prohibits these memos from being released. Comey explained them as his recording of his own memory. So yeah, we can talk about the propriety of the FBI director using a cutout, you know, leaking to the press or providing, see, I say it too, we all say it, but this is not somebody taking a classified document and secretly handing it off to a journalist. It's somebody taking an unclassified memo and sharing it with the press. And so, you know, the president would like us to talk about this as leaking. It is something different. It is releasing CYA documents.
You know, you wrote in your column, Marcy, Kasowitz's focus on purportedly privileged documents is all the more interesting given the pathetic conduct of Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats and NSA Director Mike Rogers at yesterday's 702 hearing. After a great deal of obfuscation from both men about why they couldn't answer questions about Trump's request they intervene in the FBI's Mike Flynn investigation, Angus King finally got Rogers to admit that he and Coats never got a conclusive answer about whether the White House was invoking privilege. Explain what you meant.
Right, so this hearing, it was about 702, it was about FISA, but it focused a lot on these same Russia questions, on questions of whether the president asked the Director of National Security and the Director of National Intelligence to intervene in this very same investigation. And they refused outright to answer questions about a matter that was not classified. Now, if it was privileged, if, as Shana explained, if they were people who still work for the president, who wanted to protect this information, if it was privileged, then they had a right to keep quiet about it. But they were very clear. Mike Rogers explicitly said, we don't know. There's been no invocation of executive privilege. And as you know, in this, Angus King kept pursuing them, and ultimately he asked Coats, Director Coats, what is the legal basis for you refusing to answer my questions as an oversight committee member? And Coats said, I don't know that I have a legal reason. And so you've got this contrast, day one, day two, with these men who are still leading the intelligence community, offering basically oatmeal up as an explanation for why they won't explain whether or not the president asked them to intervene in this investigation, compared with Jim Comey, who, yeah, he provided these memos that provide details of these conversations, but the president still hasn't done what he would need to do to start protecting himself and state very clearly that he considers the details of his obstruction of justice, that's what we're talking about, to be privileged. So I think the two hearings really do make an interesting bookend, and the contrast between Comey.
Point out that when you say the other two were, talk about the FISA hearing, why that hearing was even held, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act.
Right, so every year in advance of, or every time they reauthorize a major surveillance program, they have these hearings which are basically meant to make citizens learn to love the dragnet, is what I call. I mean, it's meant to reassure you that the people running this massive surveillance infrastructure are honorable and do what they're supposed to do. And there were reasons to doubt that otherwise in the hearing. But in particular this, that they basically made themselves out to be protectionists for the president. They were willing to, just out of a feeling of loyalty, hide embarrassing details about the president without any, I mean, as Director Coates said, without any known legal basis to do that.
Mehdi Hasan, I wanted to get your response to the line of questioning during Thursday's hearing by West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin.
My final question will be, after February 14th meeting in the Oval Office, you mentioned that you asked Attorney General Sessions to ensure that you were never left alone with the president. Did you ever consider why Attorney General Sessions was not asked to stay in the room?
Oh, sure. I did, and have. And in that moment, I knew.
You ever talked to him about it?
No.
You never had a discussion with Jeff Sessions on this?
No, not at all.
on any of your meetings?
No.
Did he inquire? Did he show any inquiry whatsoever? What was that meeting about?
No. Oh, you're right. I did say to him, I'd forgotten this, when I talked to him and said, you have to be between me and the president, and that's incredibly important, and I forget my exact words, I passed along the president's message about the importance of aggressively pursuing leaks of classified information, which is a goal I share, and I passed that along to the Attorney General. I think it was the next morning in a meeting, but I did not tell him about the Flynn part.
Do you believe this will rise to the obstruction of justice?
I don't know. That's Bob Mueller's job to sort that out.
Of course, Bob Mueller is the special prosecutor, special counsel who's been appointed. Mehdi Hasan, what he was talking about, this Valentine's Day meeting in the Oval Office, when he asked everyone to leave, including James Comey's boss, right, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. The last two to leave, as described by James Comey, were Jeff Sessions to leave the room because they were clearing it out of a bunch of people, as well as his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Talk about the significance of then him being alone with the president, something he had asked the Attorney General to ensure that he never had to be.
Well, first off, I love the idea of being afraid to be alone in a room with Donald Trump. But just on the specific legal, constitutional, political issues, I think James Comey made it very clear in his written statement and in the testimony yesterday that this is not the done thing. You know, there is supposed to be this buffer. There is supposed to be this independent Attorney General. And the problem, Amy, of course, the bigger picture is you have Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, who is a deeply compromised and partisan Attorney General. He recently gave a press conference from the White House press room, which is not the done thing by attorneys general. So there's a real issue there that even if Jeff Sessions had been in the room, do we actually think Jeff Sessions would have done anything to protect Comey from Trump's inappropriate requests? As for what happened in that room, just to go back to a point made earlier, you know, are there tapes? Who's telling the truth? Who's a liar or not? I mean, I wouldn't rule out the idea of there being tapes. I mean, Donald Trump has a history of recording employees, of secretly recording his employees, of listening in on phone calls between guests at Mar-a-Lago and other resorts and hotels he owns. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if he was recording people in the White House. And on the other, point,
what evidence do you have of that, Mehdi Hasan?
What evidence do I have of recording?
Yes.
I mean, it's been reported on by several investigative journalists, including BuzzFeed and others, and former employees have come forward and said that he had tape recording, then he was recording them. And Trump has actually intimated that he was listening into conversations, if you go back and look at some of the earlier biographical stuff about Trump's time as a businessman. On the obstruction of justice point specifically, I mean, Comey went out of his way, unsurprisingly, to say, I'm not going to say whether this is obstruction of justice, you know, pushed it over to Mueller, his predecessor. My problem is that it's going to take a lot to prove obstruction of justice, and it's going to take a lot to, produce the kind of smoking gun before we can talk about things like impeachment. I wrote recently that it's a liberal fantasy to talk about impeaching Trump. I stand by that. I don't think this House of Representatives, this Republican Congress, has any interest in impeaching Donald Trump, even if you were to produce a video of Trump talking in Russian to Putin, asking for his marching orders. I suspect Paul Ryan and co. would not decide to impeach him. They're too busy, rolling back financial deregulation, planning to pass huge tax cuts, putting Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. They're perfectly happy with this right-wing conservative president.
Well, Shana Kadidal, Paul Ryan, the House Speaker, shrugged off Trump's testimony. He said of Trump, he's new to government, so he probably wasn't steeped in the long-running protocols that establish the relationships between DOJ, the Department of Justice, FBI, and White House. He's just new to this.
Clearly true, but also very troubling, right? They're infantilizing the occupant of the Oval Office, which is no place for infants, you know. And
clearly he knew something when he said, I want to clear the room, when he wanted to be alone, even separate from his one of his biggest supporters, the Attorney General Sessions, who is Comey's boss.
Absolutely, certainly. I mean, the circumstances, again, of what was said rather than what was actually said about Flynn are the damning parts, right? Along with the very firing of Comey, right? But, look, one of the footnotes yesterday is that Sessions and Loretta Lynch, both past attorney generals, came off terribly. Sessions for his political weakness and Lynch for her political interference. And it illustrates a very important, I think, larger point.
No, explain that very quickly, though we don't have much time.
Sure. So Lynch basically told Comey to talk about the Clinton email investigation as a matter rather than an investigation, which Comey complied with because he knew reporters would just ignore it. But that was part of the politicized interference that made him think that the public wouldn't have confidence in the fact that the administration of justice was done correctly if he let Loretta Lynch announce simply that there were no criminal charges being brought against Clinton. So that's why he decided, in part, to announce his own conclusions in some detail, right? You know, look, in a system of separation of powers, everyone has struggled with the difficult problem of where to put the prosecuting and investigatory function. European countries put it in the judiciary. The founders thought about it, too. You do that because you want independence from the elected officials that the FBI and Justice Department may have to investigate. But you also sometimes want a political check, right? You want to be able to the people to vote in, and Obama, who names Eric Holder, who doesn't enforce the drug laws in the same way, right? This tug of war is you know, kind of a fundamental problem. There's no good solution to it. Yesterday, you saw something good about the independence of the FBI, and you also saw the downside throughout last year with the Clinton email scandal. Everything I think Comey has done through his career has been motivated by a desire to protect the independence of the FBI. But you know, the FBI historically has sometimes served as a really problematic check on political dissent. We also need an FBI director who will fight that. We've never had it.
Finally, Marcy Wheeler, where does this lead? Mehdi Hasan said it's not leading to impeachment. What do you say?
I think there's a much higher chance than Mehdi does. I think one of the things that was interesting yesterday is Comey really deferred all question about the obstruction of justice investigation to Mueller. He had great things to say about Mueller. And there will be more to come out.
We're going to leave it there. I want to thank you all for your input. Marcy Wheeler of EmptyWheel.net speaking to us from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Mehdi Hasan of Al Jazeera English, host of the program Up Front, also an Intercept columnist. And thanks so much to Shana Kadidal of the Center for Constitutional Rights. I'll be speaking Saturday in Chicago, 9:30 McCormick Place for the People's Summit. On Sunday, I'll give the keynote address at the New York City Green Festival, 1 p.m. Javits Convention Center. I'm Amy Goodman.